Well, hello, friend. This is Pastor Greg, and I am going to be doing a four-part series on anti-Semitism here. And this is the first of our four lessons. So let me go ahead and pull up the screen so you can see it. And so we're in the beginning of a four-part series here. And as you can see, the first part will basically be my story. The second part will be on anti-Semitism as the foundational racism that there is, and I think we can establish that. The third part will be on the new anti-Semitism, and the point of this will be to show you how really where things are at and where they're going and to help you become informed. And then the fourth part will be on the Judensau. And I think this will really be, if you will, a case study to help us understand the concern in modern America with egregious statues. So when I think about my story, let me just say that my story is, it's, um, it's really minimal. It's anything like people that I know that have been through just horrible situations. Um, for really my whole life, I've known people who have been connected with the Holocaust. And so I don't have anything to complain about. But I do think that it's appropriate for me as I begin a series on anti-Semitism to at least um, try to, as it were, relate with the reality of what is going on in the world around us. And so that is just the reality. And so I feel like I should do that and begin with my story. So as you know, we're all in the middle of national crisis with racism, the whole Black Lives Matter movement, and we're all very concerned with what's going on. The recent George Floyd murder, the horrible situation that started in Minneapolis and is now across the country. And so I was thinking about it and then trying to understand it with it, trying to come to grips with certain aspects of it and struggling with the whole idea of when people say Black Lives Matter and then we respond with all lives matter. And I was struggling with this and what is the right way to respond to that. And so I was out for a run. You know, I'm a runner and I like to run. I'm not fast, but I go long and I just enjoy the time to meditate. And I'm out there running, and that's often when I hear from the Lord. And I really felt like he said to me, Greg, when you talk about anti-Semitism, you just want people to listen. You just want to know that they heard you. The last thing you want to hear when you talk to them about anti-Semitism is, well, you know, all lives matter. No, that would come across to me as they really weren't listening. You know, so when I talked about Greg, when you talk about anti-Semitism, you just want to know that they heard you. And so when people say Black Lives Matter, yeah, there are people who are abusing the movement, and that could be done with any movement. But the real issue is, do Black Lives Matter? They do. And people, when they really just want to know that we've heard them. And so that really caught my heart. With that in mind, let me just, as we begin here, there will be a lot of times throughout this four-part series in which you'll see things that are both underlined and blue. And when it's underlined, bold, and blue like that, that will mean after this slide that there is a link. And you could, if you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to go through the PowerPoint and it'll either be the sources for that or it'll take you to a source where there's even more information. And so this is a fairly well resourced document for you, these four videos. So starting with my experience with anti-Semitism, my story. Well, I grew up in a little town called Tenafly, New Jersey, 8 miles from New York City via the George Washington Bridge. At the time, it had 14,000 people in it. I don't know if it's true, but I heard back then that the city might have been as much as 14% Jewish. I don't know. I don't think that's exactly right, but it could be. We looked it up just recently and saw that it is 4.2% Jewish now. So maybe it's come down. It very well may have, for reasons that I'll describe. I was bar mitzvahed under Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg. He was a significant person in the Jewish world. He was the president of the American Jewish Congress from 1972 to 1978 and the vice president of the World Jewish Congress from 72 to 91. And so we're talking about, I really grew up in the heart of American Judaism and really in the heart of world Judaism. Now, Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg was very much into social justice, as most Jews are. He participated with Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1963 March on Washington. He participated in the 1965 Bloody Sunday march, and so he was very involved. He participated in 1943 in a rabbi's march. He was very involved. He actually stood for Palestinian rights. So he's an unusual rabbi. In fact, here's an article from the Sun Centennial, South Florida Sun Centennial, published in 2006 about him. It says, and also in the Jewish Standard, you can see both sources on this slide. The article I'm reading from, though, is from the Jewish Standard. It says, Rabbi Arthur Hertzberg will be remembered both as a prominent Jewish leader and a civil rights activist who took part in the famous 1963 March on Washington with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But 20 years earlier, Hertzberg took part in another extraordinary march in Washington to urge President Franklin Roosevelt to rescue Jews from the Holocaust, where he was one of 400 rabbis in that march. So he has been involved in civil rights his whole life. Here is a picture of a scene from one of the Selma to Montgomery, Alabama marches in 1965. And the Jewish Telegraphic Agency has an article on this, on that particular march, pointing out that there were so many Jews at that march that the local shops sold out of yarmulkes and many Jews spent Shabbat behind bars. Jews have been involved in civil rights in America since the very beginning of the civil rights movement. It's just the reality. Now I grew up in Tenafly, in a town that was pretty well to do. It had a country club a quarter mile up the road from my house, the Knickerbocker Country Club. My dad played golf, but he was clear he could not join the club because the club had a no Jews policy. They had a couple Jewish people in it that were called token Jews, and no other Jews were allowed in it, so he couldn't join. So he played golf somewhere else. I know what it was like growing up. There was a few times where I was punched. I was punched in the face, punched in the stomach, shoved many times, just for being Jewish. I remember one time I lived near the end of Tenafly, and a mile away from my house was the Bergenfield bowling alley. And one day I was there just around dusk time with a friend, and he could see what was going on. He ran in the bowling alley because he could see what was going to happen. And I was not as quick to respond. And this gang of youngsters, my age, gathered around me. One guy grabbed me from behind, held my arms back like that. And another guy came right up to me and he held a knife to my chest. Now, I'm not saying like an inch from my chest. I mean, I could feel the knife on the point of the knife on my chest, a 4 or 5 inch long knife. And he held a knife right up against my chest because I wore a Star of David, and he said, "Are you a Jew?" I could tell you about countless times when people threw pennies at me. Cheap Jew, cheap Jew. I could tell you about a number of times when I'd be sitting in class, especially in high school, not so much in middle school, but middle school too, and someone would pass me a note, and it would have something anti-Semitic in it. Most often it would use the word kike. If you don't know the word kike, it is basically the same as the N-word for Black people. It's the same thing, the same kind of discriminatory, kind of disgusting word. And so I had many times I'd be sitting in class and I'd get a note like that. I graduated high school in 1975. I was telling my wife, Donna, about some of these experiences about a week ago, and she just started getting online and look, and she found this article in the New York Post from May 2nd, 2001. It says Orthodox Jews not welcome. The article begins, after nearly a year of bitter and emotional controversy, the former council president of the town of Tenafly, New Jersey, has finally answered the $64,000 question. He and his colleagues won't allow construction of an unobtrusive religious boundary because he's afraid that too many Orthodox Jews will move into town. The article continues, allowing Tenafly's growing community of observant Jews to erect an Erev, a symbolic, nearly invisible border that would allow its members to perform certain tasks on the Sabbath, would create a ghetto, Dick Wilson told a federal court judge on Monday. So this is happening in court, friend. And he's telling the reason. He's saying basically it's going to make a situation where Jews are going to move into town in court. He says there is a tendency for only people of the Orthodox faith to live in that neighborhood, he testified. And that, he added, would cause divisiveness in town. The article says, it's about time someone finally came clean and admitted what the Orthodox community has been fearing for most of the past year, because it underscores the fact that what's at work here is what the American Jewish Congress has rightly called a form of subtle racism. Now, let me be really clear about this. What they said in court is, we don't want to build this nearly invisible border, a symbolic, unobtrusive border, because if we do, then more religious Jews will move into town. That was what was said in court, and the court agreed with it. The court ruled that the Arab did not, that the city was justified to not build the Arab. What is an Arab? Well, it's a symbolic, nearly invisible border. Here is an article that's published in D Magazine, January 2011. You can look at it at the link by just clicking on the blue. And the article is called "How Fishing Wire Helps North Texas Jews Live in the Modern World." You see that picture of the blue sky with the stop sign and the light post? You see that little fishing wire coming across? And so fishing wire like that will be put up around the city, and it creates this kind of like an area that is seen as this is the home, and Jews can travel, quote unquote, within their house area so that they're not violating the Sabbath day's journey. And so Orthodox Jews like to live in areas where there's an Arab. There are at least four of these Arabs in the Dallas area. The far north Dallas Arab, you can see how big it is. And Jews they'll just live in the area. Well, they specifically said they're not going to build it in Tenafly because it will mean that Jews will move into the area. Well, my friend, this is redlining. The term redlining, this is how Encyclopedia Britannica defines it, the term redlining came about in reference to the use of red marks on maps that loan corporations would use to outline mixed race or African American neighborhoods. Now, redlining is technically illegal. But in Tenafly, New Jersey, my hometown, a twisted form of redlining has been approved by the courts as a way to technically exclude Orthodox Jews. And the city plainly admits in court that they did what they did for the purpose of minimizing the Orthodox Jewish presence. This is legal in America in the year 2020. This is really weird. Well, I told you about my life. Let me tell you about my children's story. My children were off to come home from school. We lived in basically an hour from Minneapolis. They would often come home from school and they would say, somebody said to me today, "That's so Jewish." And I'll tell you what, it wasn't meant in a complimentary way, ever. That's so Jewish. One day, one of my kids came home and he said, he heard a joke today. What's the first fast food? And the answer is the first fast food was when Hitler put the Jews in the ovens. By the way, you see that link on the side there, stopantisemitism.org. Mel Gibson was recently awarded the privilege of being the anti-Semite of the week because he asked Winona Ryder, who is Jewish, "You're not an oven dodger, are you?" And sadly, in the article, which you could go there and see, they called him Hollywood's biggest repeat bigot. And you know what? I love his movies, but he's got quite a history in the area of anti-Semitism. I've told you about my life. I've told you about my kids' lives. Let me move upwards to my parents and in the other direction. My mother often told me about a time when she was mugged in New York City while the assailants were encouraged to continue by a priest as he watched. Go ahead. do this. She deserves it. She's a Jew. That's how she told the story. Well, her mother, my grandmother, came from Poland, where 3 million of the 3.3 million Jews were killed during the Holocaust. My mother's father, my grandfather, was from Germany, his family from Germany. He would never talk about his experiences. But when I accepted Jesus, my grandfather, as you'll understand why by the end of these 4 lessons, my grandfather was so hurt when I accepted Jesus that he literally put his hands around my neck to choke me. Whenever the Holocaust would come up, he would never talk, he would just cry. When his grandson, whom he deeply loved, accepted Jesus, it was more than he could bear. 5 years after that incident with him putting his hands on my neck, he passed away. Now I understand, I loved him, he loved me, and that never changed. Okay, but 5 years after that, he passed away, and 10 days later, my 4th child was born, and I named Jeffrey Jerome after him. He was the male figure of my life. In my last church, we had a key businessman and probably the key lay leader of the church. Don and I were over his house one day. We were having dinner, wonderful experience. And during the dinner, he's telling me about a business deal he did. And he actually said this. Now, he knows I'm Jewish. And he says, I Jewed the guy down. Now, I didn't say anything. I didn't let him know what I was thinking, but I heard it. And I don't know if he repented or what. I don't know. But it was an awkward moment. At another incident, I was in a denomination in Minnesota, and about an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes from the state headquarters. And there was a ministry there called Good News for Israel that I barely knew about. A couple of years after this incident, they asked me to be on their board, and I got to serve, which I'm thankful for. But this Good News for Israel wanted to put on a conference in Minneapolis to basically build the bridge between Judaism, or between the church and her roots, and Jewish evangelism, and just highlight, Jewish roots, and in a way that the church should be happy with, I would think, and I would still think that. And so they wanted to put this conference on. They wanted the denomination's support for the conference, so they contacted the denomination. The denomination said, "Well, we know Greg, and he's a good part of our denomination here in the state of Minnesota." So they called me up and said, "Greg, would you come be a part of this meeting? We'd like to know what you think." So I was the only Jewish pastor in the state in Minnesota that anybody knew about, and frankly, I was the only senior Jewish pastor in the denomination in the country. There are other pastors, but not senior pastors. There were senior rabbis of Messianic congregations, but not pastors. And so I went to the meeting, and the denomination did support that event, and I went to it, and I got to be a part of it, and it was a wonderful event. But during the discussion of when we were deciding whether or not the denomination would support the event or not, at one point, a key person in the room said to us, "How can this help us reach Muslims?" Now, that might not seem odd to you, but it really caught my ear. It was unfortunate to me. It's because here's what I knew. I knew that that man, as much as he loved me, and he did, and still does, but I knew that he went to a weekly prayer meeting on Fridays for Muslims in the area. And I knew that there was no similar prayer meeting in the city of Minneapolis for Jewish people in the denomination. And so that wasn't going on. And I knew that he would never ask that kind of question in a Muslim meeting. How will this help us to reach Jews? So you can see how that just kind of just felt awkward to me. Probably the most painful experience, though, that I have had in the ministry as a Jew, may not seem like much to anybody else, but to me it was. These days, there are many Facebook pages for that denomination, and I'm actually a part of a number of those Facebook pages. But in that day, there were only 2. And the 2 were, one of them was just the name of the denomination. These are unofficial. They're not owned by the denomination, completely unofficial. One of them just gives the name of the denomination. The other felt that this one was too liberal, and they felt that they wanted to be the gatekeepers for the movement. And so they put the words "conservatively speaking," ... and then the name of the denomination. And I liked both groups. The conservative speaking one was larger, and frankly, I liked that group more generally because I am a conservative person theologically. And so one year I posted on there um, something about Passover, and I was happy, and I got all kinds of bad feedback. I just went on with life. And then Yom Kippur comes around. When Yom Kippur comes around, I post something on there. I said, hey, Yom Kippur is coming up, and I'm going to be fasting and praying for the people of Israel, for the salvation of Israel, and I'm just kind of happy about this opportunity to fast and pray. Well, I got barraged, not from the average person, but from the leadership, the administrators of that Facebook page. They just attacked me. And it was like, where's this coming from? And it just, like, they said things that were just wrong. And I was just trying to I was trying everything I knew to be gracious. And it got to the point where other people started getting in there and saying things. And finally, one guy, not me, somebody else said, you guys sound like anti-Semitic. And at that point, one of the administrators for the Facebook page responded to his comment that this guy said, you sound anti-Semitic. His response was to ban me. He kicked me off the page and blocked me from that Facebook page. Not didn't block him, blocked me. And the next day I actually contacted that guy who made the comment and said, how are you doing? Oh, he was fine, but I got blocked. Okay, and it was the oddest thing. Now, what they did not know, and they don't know it unless they're hearing it right now for the first time. This, I believe, was 2012. It's been a little while. I could tell with the way that was going, it was getting hot. And it wasn't hot from me. It was hot from them. And I could tell that was happening. And so I literally, about 5 seconds before they blocked me, I opened the stream and copied the stream and saved it on my computer. I still have that stream today. Now, you know how on a Facebook post you hit more for all of the extra stuff? I didn't have time to open all of the mores, but I do have the stream, all the names and the first line or two of everything they said, and I still have that. And from time to time, I will still go back to try to see if I can see what's going on in that page. I'm just really being honest with you here, because to be frank, I love the denomination. I care about it. And it's like Jesus said, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets. How often have I wanted to gather you together as a hen gathers chicks under her wings, but you would not. And they were just, the way they treated me for no reason other than the fact that I was Jewish, fasting and praying on Yom Kippur, not asking them to fast and pray. Very clear they didn't need to do it. But the fact that I was doing it was an eyesore to them. And I was therefore a Judaizer because I was acting as a Jew among them. It was just, it was really problematic for me. Well, friend, anti-Semitism is very widespread. It is on every continent in the world today, and it is in every country. It is ancient. You can find it in the life of Abram, who was called a Hebrew 4,000 years ago. The word Hebrew means one from beyond, probably one from beyond the Euphrates, but the real idea is he is an alien. He's not one of us. The Hittites, when Abraham needed a piece of property to bury his wife Sarah, you could read that story and you might not catch it, but the Hittites sold that land to Abraham at an exorbitant price because they had him where they needed him. The Philistines repeatedly stole wells from Isaac. The Egyptians enslaved all the Jews. Why? Because they were Jews. The Egyptians despised the Jews. Why? Because they were shepherds. They're dirty people. They're shepherds. Haman and the Persians wanted to kill all the Jews in the book of Esther 2,300 years ago because they're not like other people. Antiochus and the Syrians wanted to commit genocide against all the Jews. That's the story of Hanukkah 2,200 years ago. So this is something that's existed for a long time. So friend, this is an ancient problem. And it's everywhere. And pretty much every Jew knows what it's like to have some experiences with it. But I want you to know you can chart your future. Because the scripture says, I will bless those who bless you, and I'll curse him who curses you, and in you will all the families of the earth be blessed. And it is God's intention. He says, I'll bless those who bless you, the plurality. I will curse him, the singularity. I will curse him who curses you. I want to make the blessing big. I want to make the cursing small. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed. The fact that he goes from the plurality to the singular to the all shows and makes the clear point he really does mean all. And I love the way Pastor Robert Morris says this. He says, if you brush your teeth and you don't wear deodorant, you might say, well, I still smell. Obviously, brushing the teeth didn't stop me from smelling. No, you've run with one principle, but there are more principles. And friend, this is a universal principle that neither you nor your family nor anybody you will ever meet, nor any person in all of humanity will ever escape this principle. This is a principle that determines whether or not a certain blessing or a certain curse is upon them. And it is what they do with Abraham and his family and his descendants. And in fact, with that in mind, I would just like to speak a blessing over you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. God bless you, and I look forward to being with you again in the very next meeting.